good morning to the Caron YouTube audience, and another good morning to those of you who are here with me in the auditorium, and anybody who might be watching or on campus on live stream. It sure is a privilege for me to be with you all this morning. And I keep saying this, but it's another week when I've been wrestling that with the message, so we'll see where this goes. I have a series of topics. Today's topic is an old-fashioned word, valor, and it may or may not immediately correlate for you with what brings you to a Caron experience or relationship, but hopefully I'll connect those dots in a way that's meaningful and helpful for us today. I want to start, one of my challenges with this topic is it reminds me of when humility comes up in the topic series. I don't want to claim valor myself. That would be an unwise thing. And yet I draw on my own stories for examples of the Caron Chapel service so much. So I'm going to try and steer in a skillful way around that. I'd like to tell you about a woman named Mary who became a friend of mine and helped me when I was the pastor of a large church in the early 2000s. And Mary presented herself to me. She became a member of the congregation, and then she became a vital member of the things that that church was doing. And so we intersected it all the time. And she eventually became a key leader in a big, huge project that we were doing. And I got to see her in action. She was formidable. She was kind, she was brilliant, and she was wise. She had lived a life like most of us, if you're old enough, look back and some of it had been difficult. Anyway, one of the things I found out about Mary as we were getting to know each other was that her current employment, which was post-retirement employment, was she would be hired frequently as an executive coach. It's one of these 21st century things, more so I think we hear about it than I suspected. It's existed for longer than just the last 23 years. But anyway, that was Mary. She was an executive coach. And I remember thinking, wow, how fortunate I am to have an executive coach in service to our congregation and in friendship and relationship with me. And as we got to work together and got to know each other better, there was a certain day when something happened in me and I was feeling really safe with Mary, and I poured out my heart to her about stuff that was going on in my personal life rather than consulting with her about the leadership dynamics of the role I had in the congregation. Because as it happened, I was a mess. And there were things happening in my soul and in my personal circumstances that were less than optimal. And I even remember thinking, gosh, should I keep blah, 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 blah with this person who, in the role of a church pastor, there's a discernment that has to be made about how much privacy you share with people who are in that relationship. So, and Mary never, it turned out to have been a very appropriate and safe move. But Mary asked me two questions that day after I had shared all this stuff. And I've never forgotten the two questions. I suspect they came from the executive coaching methods that she used, but they were really helpful. I want to share with you what the two questions are and think a little bit about it. Her two questions were, Jack, what do you really want? Pause. And Jack, what are you willing to give up to get it? There's a part of me that is annoyed by the pairing, but it's an accurate pairing because I do believe that life is about choice, and choice is about the road not taken, right? In any decision to go one way, there's a decision not to go another. And so there are prices to be paid for the pursuit of the choices that we make. And they may or may not be evident to us in the moment, and And in fact, surely they're not. I think often we don't know what the price downstream will be of choices we make, and we probably make choices thinking we can anticipate future outcomes, but my guess is we don't do that any better than the weathermen or weather meteorologists. So those questions were spot on for me at that moment. In a time of personal crisis, it was a good nudge and helped me with some degree of discernment when I felt like I was in a mess. You know, I was like, whoa, this is bad, this is bad, this is falling, this is crazy, this is, you know, and her invitation to me to seek to set a horizon marker and then contemplate this as a choice that would involve sacrifice was helpful in a time when I felt I didn't know I was lost, like the song we were just singing. I mean, I did know I was lost, that didn't help me. Knowing I was lost was like, what do I do? So, in thinking about the word valor, and one of the things I'm trying to do is steer clear of a bad habit I have in Sunday messages, which is to go academic here. So I'll say aloud, I intend not to do that as much today as I often do. But I'm a word nerd, and I like theory and analytical reflection, and I think it's worthwhile and important in its proper place. So what do I mean by valor? Well, I've come up with a small definition that is my own. I haven't checked it against Webster or anything like that, but in order to explain to you what I'm talking about when I use the word valor is I'm talking about courageous action for the sake of noble ends. Now that's a mouthful, but stay with me for a minute. What I'm talking about is something that requires courage, that is not necessarily the easy way. And I'm not only talking about something that requires courage and isn't necessarily the easy way, but I also mean that what it aims for is something that is, and the word nobility I almost took away because it's associated with aristocracy, and in today's politically correct world that may be an unpopular thought, but no, what I meant is that in our social world, it's worthy of respect and honor, right? The ends that we would perhaps all to some degree wish were ends that we would undertake. So this rules out a couple things. It rules out cowardice. It rules out foolish, daredevil, Evel Knievel stuff, because that may take some measure of what you would call courage, but it's not for a worthwhile end, I don't think. And it also, I hope, rules out the mere materialism that drives so many people. Money, sex, power, wealth stuff. Because I don't know that, that surely is a social value, but this is why I want to go back to the word nobility. I think that what I'm talking about is something that draws in on subject matter like virtue and the very, very best of what human beings can be. And that we would admire. And I would ask you to think about who in your heritage or your experience are the people that you really look up to, not because they accumulated a ton of money or because they had the, sexiest partner or they had the most sex or, whatever, which are sadly these things that are paraded in front of us as if they're what we should be setting as our horizon points. But I'm remembering my dad, and that just popped. But I don't have this part of the message rehearsed. So I suspect there are people. My dad was an imperfect being, but he wanted to be a good man and to be a good dad, and I remember talking to him about the work that he did, which was in an esoteric aspect of the international business world. But one of the things I remember him telling me as a young boy was that he felt that he served in a playing field where there was a lot of mercantilism and materialism at play, and that he felt good because as he retired at 53, and then died at 54, darn it, but as he retired, he reflected on his life and said, I have never gone into that with my objective being those objectives. I've gone in trying to feel like I am serving and making a difference in a positive way. And that's one of the reasons why I admire my dad, who was definitely alcoholic, never sought recovery in spite of seeing it in some of the people that were close in his life, and I regret and lament that. He had tons of other failings. People have failings. It doesn't mean they're not valorous, that they're not worthy of our respect and honor. In a complicated world, this is deeply true. And when I was growing up, the stories of our day, I think, set me up for not getting that at some level. So I was trying to think of, what was the thing I thought of this morning was Yellowstone versus the Waltons. Is that, no, what was the, it's not.
Bonanza?
No, it's an old West Virginia countryside, Little House on the Prairie, right?
Oh,
and like those were depicted as like that was supposed to be raw and real. No, and the worst that happened was there was some scandalous story about your daddy being the milkman instead of the one of the things I find interesting about Scripture is that it depicts very complicated and messy people. But when I was a kid in the legacy of the 1950s, I think there was this depiction, even Happy Days or whatever, like that. What we saw as salty in the media was not especially salty. And today, are you kidding? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a devotee of Yellowstone in 1923 and 1883 and these TV shows, but And the proliferation of post-apocalyptic stuff, to me it says something dark about the world in which we live in, which I think we may have tilted towards this. I think we've quit. We've given up on the notion of being persons of virtue and of value and of decency. It's as if we've written a permission slip to be jerks in the name of our, holding on to a piece of property yes, family cohesion is a noble thing in itself, but anyway, I'm a little off. So, Mary, choices involve consequences. Virtue as choices that we make for noble ends. A guy came here a number of years ago. Steve was his first name. I don't know if there are too many people in the room who will remember Steve, but he had a huge impression on me and on Father Bill. He had been in the armed forces, had served as a captain, and one of the things we read from the podium here was the letter which accorded him the Silver Star. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's, I think, the highest honor that can be awarded to a service person for valor in battle. He had been in Iraq. He had been in a unbelievably horrible situation. And he even had the capacity to have fled. He could have run away from the circumstances in which he was, but he was a captain. And he not only stayed, but he stayed in such a way that he was able to get dead and living members of his team out of there. So he did not abandon them. And as he came here to Caron, talk about imperfect people. Yes, he had a substance use disorder that was refractory. It had resisted treatment. But he had PTSD, and he had cognitive compromise. He had you could sense it when you'd spend time with him, that his brain was not really working as well as you and I would like our brains to work. And this was associated, we were told by the medical team, with shelling and brain injury from the circumstances of his service. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a valorous dude. One of the most valorous, probably, people I've ever met. And if you met Steve, he did have an intense sense of pride about what had happened, but he was not, old word, braggadocious. He was not all about himself. And in fact, he had these peculiar characteristics of people coming out of those circumstances, one of which, I think he would have gone back the next day if they would have sent him back. Because in that place he fit and knew who he was. And he had this incredible insecurity. He had this real inner sense of brokenness that made me so sad. Because I saw him as like an incredibly admirable dude. And I'm trying to steer clear of the politics of war, and I mean that's where nobility and virtue and all that sort of stuff gets really fuzzy in those places. But our battlefield is right here. You would not be watching a Caron YouTube or sitting in the Caron red chair or watching from a Caron patient milieu if you were not caught up in a set of dynamics that include the person who suffers from addiction and loved ones around them. And those of us who suffer, I'm one of those who's an addict. I still think of myself as an addict. Don't put Cheetos near me. And I haven't had a drink or a drug for the purpose of intoxication in a very long time, and I have other behaviors I have to watch out for. I essentially don't gamble other than the occasional lottery ticket because that would be a thing that would activate me, and I'm very, very selective. Anyway, point is, people who suffer from addiction are often viewed as amoral or making these immoral choices, much less not valorous, right? We're described as incredibly selfish, self-centered, dishonest, cheating, no good. You could probably extend the list. I'd ask you not to. But one of the deep truths that I've come to believe is this thing that comes out of the brain science of addiction. From a theological standpoint, I would tell you, I think addiction resembles what the scriptures call demonic possession. In that, the person whose behavior we are labeling as vile, they are in the throes of something they can't really stop. And you might be very skeptical about that. Like, why would Joe miss his kid's birthday? Or why would, a mother, shoot heroin while there were needs of the kids or the family or loved one? It's mystifying from a moral standpoint. Almost that is by definition then addiction in play. It's one of the characteristics that helps us identify, is this person an addict or not? Is their behavior out of alignment with their values? If it is, then that's a really good indicator that there probably is a use disorder in play that takes over the behavior. So while you may, if you're a loved one, want to talk to your addicted person about how immoral their choices are, it's really important, I think, to understand that recovery is about regaining moral agency. And I remember when I was first getting sober, I read the 12 steps and I was like, what does that mean, a fearless and searching moral inventory? I was like, what? Why? First of all, why? What does that have to do with drinking or not drinking? And secondly, like, what? To me, it was like the Snoopy's teacher. That was not my vocabulary, and it was not my concern. But it has become my concern as an immense gift, a harvest from the abstinence, is that I can care about what I do. And I can try and navigate the ship of my life towards respect and honor that we would all accord. So that maybe someday my granddaughters who've come to me through my second marriage will look up and go, oh, I just so admired Jack, right? Because I wasn't the jerk that people knew me as 30 years ago. 35 years ago is when I stopped drinking, but I'm going to leave it as a jerk at 30 years ago. I didn't get instantly like pure and noble. And those of you with the wristband probably will not either. So, who are the noble characters among us? Well, I'm going to talk about the people who get into recovery because I think that's an amazingly noble journey. And I'm going to say the family members have something going for them. Like if you're actually sitting in this audience or you're watching on YouTube and you have a loved one who's like in the throes of this crap, I admire that. I respect it. And I would call that courageous action in the face, in search of noble ends. If you're still in the game, if you haven't cut every tie and you haven't wandered off and said, let him die on the hill, and then, honestly, sometimes that's where love takes us. But I am amazingly impressed with the people who stick and stay, with the hostage brain that those of us who have this illness suffer. I kind of am bewildered by the faithfulness of loved ones. And I have come to have incredible empathy for the horrible decision-making that they face. Do I fund another, X? Do I co-sign another Y when I'm afraid what's going to happen is, so if I give them money and they use it to buy drugs, I'm going to feel awful. And if I withhold money and I find out they're dead, I'm going to feel awful. Like what a paradoxical mess that is. You're in a worse spot than I was with Mary when I didn't know what to do with my marriage and my money and all those different things that people worry about were a mess at that time. And she was like, what do you want, Jack? And the what do you want is where I'm going to go back to. Because I want to make a fundamental claim that there's a thing that we want, which isn't about respect and honor. It's not about that. It's about love. It's about, and yes, to a certain extent, it's about human dignity. It's to be at least able to look ourselves in the mirror and not despise what we see, and to look ourselves. Last night I was with my family and the kids and grandkids, and our 4-year-old Charlotte. Gosh, is she entertaining as heck? And she got my cell phone, and she's like, "I'm going to take pictures." And this 4-year-old takes great pictures, and she knows to position herself further back to get the whole. She gets the whole family in there, and that captures what I think is the value that recovery holds in front of us. Is for Steve with the Silver Star to get his cohort out of there, those who still survive. And maybe that's what I'm talking about. Those of us who survive this horrid battle, to at least find ways to stay together, or at least to parent together, even if our marriages don't repair, or to live in love rather than in hate and in terrible, fractured, I hate you and I hate you thing, right? And you are vile and I am, worthy. You think that is fundamentally a lower aim than I wish we would shoot for. Those of us who should wear I'm a wristwatch, and when I say the wristband, that's a sign of a current care patient, right? So people who are here in early treatment and renewal of their recovery or beginning of recovery, I want you to hear that's the horizon point that I think is the one to put on the radar screen, is to get back to love, get back to a constituent of some sort of cohort that looks like a family and functions like a family, because we're involved for that. And every wisdom tradition worth its salt celebrates it. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam are handed-on traditions that come down from ancestors because belonging is key to our social and individual survival. And pray that we not end up in some post-apocalyptic nightmare. God bless the poor people of Syria and Turkey who are experiencing a dread I cannot imagine. And I thank God that we are not there today. You may feel like you are in a blast zone, but I will share with you, you are not. If you are able to sit here and hear this message, there is hope. There is valor right in front of you to begin or continue to choose action based on noble ends. Head for the right headings. Go for the good. Go for the love. Let the better angels of our nature guide who and what we are today. Rise to the call and come forward with love, not, don't give up, don't despair, don't despise. Take heart and find courage to head in the right direction. This is my prayer.